Hello and welcome to the Study Abroad Pod. In celebration of Pride Month, this episode explores leaning into whoever you are while being abroad. Host Dr. Jeremy Doughty is joined by USAC London alumni Walker and Jeanine, who will share candid reflections on embracing their queer identities and finding joy while taking classes overseas.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this special Pride Month episode of the USAC podcast. I'm Dr. Jeremy Doughty, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. I had the joy of directing USAC study abroad programs in England for several years, and today I'm joined by two of my favorite human beings. We've got Jeanine and Walker. This episode is all about queer joy, identity, and discovery abroad. So Jeanine, can you introduce yourself with your name, where you went to undergrad, when you studied abroad, and one of your favorite British snacks?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I am Jeanine Martinez. I originally came from Northern Arizona University during my undergrad, and I decided I really wanted to study abroad. So I picked USAC to help me through that journey and never looked back. Absolutely amazing opportunity. One of my favorite British snacks had to have been Coke Zero with lime. I've only ever seen it there. I have not found it in the United States since then, and it makes me so sad. And Noops, which they make like chocolate shakes. And I think about those all the time because I love chocolate.
Coke Zero with lime sounds very refreshing for the summer months. And Walker, what about you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Walker Dalton. I am originally from San Antonio, Texas, and I went to undergrad at Appalachian State University in North Carolina. And I studied abroad between September 2021 through June 2022. And my favorite British snack probably has to be chocolate cakes. My French flatmate at the time would always judge me for eating them because he always thought that the artificial orange flavor of the cakes were pretty bad. But it was quite fun being able to say that I was eating something called a Jaffa cake. I hadn't heard of them before, and they were pretty tasty.
All right. Well, I'm curious, what made you decide to study abroad in London with USAC?
So I had always planned to study abroad because it was part of my curriculum with my undergrad degree in global studies. But I had an internship lined up at the time with the State Department. I decided upon London because it just made the most sense, I believe, with this internship. Unfortunately, the internship fell through during COVID, and I decided, you know what? I'm still going to London. And it was an amazing opportunity.
I remember getting ready May 2023 for the whole month of June that I'd be in London. And I just kept thinking about all the food I was going to try. I especially love like Ethiopian food, and I've only ever had Ethiopian food in Washington, D.C. And there's not a lot in Arizona, if hardly any. And same thing in California, where I'm originally from. So all I kept thinking about was like, I'm going to try a bunch of like different African cuisine. I'm going to try like the, typical UK breakfast, all those things. So food was on my mind. That was my priority. My money was spent on food.
I mean, it's hard not to have food on your mind when you're in London. 1 in every 4 Londoners was actually born outside of the United Kingdom. And that's really reflected in the city's food. You have everything from A to Z, from food from Afghanistan all the way through food from Zambia. Now, I'm really curious to know what's something that made you really nervous before you departed that kind of makes you laugh now?
Well, as a woman of color and as a woman with curly hair, I was so worried about the rain and the humidity affecting my curls, just because my natural curls fall flat when it rains and I get like really stringy hair and it doesn't look nice. So I was just like, oh, I'm going to look awful in all of my pictures, or I'm not going to know how to like tame my frizz. And so I was really concerned about that because I feel like hair is a huge part of my identity in terms of like how I present myself and like how I show up. It's what makes me feel really confident when I enter spaces because I have pretty rockin' hair. And I think that's one of the first thing that people notice about me is like, oh, she has curly hair and it's so nice. I'm like, thank you. So I was worried about just managing that piece. But actually, that's like the time I look back at the most and I'm like, wow, my hair looked amazing. The humidity did wonders. So always trying to replicate that as much as
You
I
did.
can.
You did, and I recall that because you were one of our social media brand ambassadors and you slayed with your hair throughout the entire summer.
Oh, thank you so much. I was so proud of that hair. I was like, wow, I look amazing.
And Walker, what about you?
So growing up in San Antonio, specifically on the outskirts of San Antonio, I've never lived in a major city like London before. And I always felt more comfortable identifying sort of with that country lifestyle. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do in London? How am I going to fit in? And one of the first things I noticed in London was that nobody was saying hello to each other on the sides of the streets. Everyone just kept walking and kept to themselves. And that's the exact opposite of what I'm used to growing up in Texas. And now I think I laugh at that because living now in Washington, D.C., I keep to myself. I get from point A to point B without saying a word to anybody. And I feel like I fit in pretty well. Just almost second nature now.
2 questions for each of you about packing. What's one thing that you packed and never used? And then also, what's one thing that you packed and use all the time?
I feel that the thing that I used all the time were my trainers, these like just some like old pair of like running shoes that I kind of had. They looked pretty nice. And I was like, oh, I could dress them up, dress them down. So they're pretty like versatile in that way, which I'm super thankful for because I wore them practically every day. And I was walking about 15K steps, like on average. I love looking back at that June. That's the most I walked. And then the thing that I think I didn't use at all, I think like back to my hair, I brought like so much like sealant type things to try to keep the humidity out. And then at some point I was like, this is one too many steps for me. I'm a simple girly. And again, the best my hair has ever looked.
Yeah, I don't know if you two have seen those TikTok videos about people who do like 500 to 1,000 steps a day in the US, but when they study abroad, they do like 15,000 to 20,000 steps a day, just because there's so much to see, especially in cities like London.
I think that's a great question because when you asked that question, I was trying to think about what's something I never used, but I know I can answer the other part. And so I brought an Nalgene, just a nice, simple, sturdy water bottle. And I'd carry that everywhere with me on the university, even outside of the university as well, just when I'm traveling, maybe because I always went to the British Library, but I always had that water bottle with me.
I love that. Now, before we jump into some of our questions about queer identity, I want to ask the two of you what you've been up to since studying abroad. So, Walker, tell us a little bit more about your journey after spending the whole academic year in London.
So right after I studied abroad in London, I came home for Texas for a few months and immediately got packing once again to go to Washington, D.C. for a graduate program at Georgetown University in conflict resolution. I finished up that program about in a year and a half. And then 9 months later, I had a job working within the federal government. Unfortunately, I no longer have a job working with the federal government, but that's okay. And I am currently working on applying for PhD programs in political science.
It sounds like you've been on quite a journey. I've always been a firm believer that crisis births opportunity. So perhaps losing your job is actually a blessing in disguise, and it will push you in a new direction and perhaps a more exciting direction too.
Thank you. While I wasn't working, I was actively involved with the queer community in DC and putting together a big archival history exhibit on the history of Pride in DC from 1965 through today. So while the job was a little boring, I did have a gay job and it has been quite fulfilling.
Well, I'm excited to hear what comes next for you, Walker. Jeanine, what about you?
Yeah. So that summer, right after June, I was a rising senior at that point, and my undergrad was in secondary education English. And I realized after studying abroad, I was like, I want to do something different other than teaching, something still educational, but like, what is that? So I decided to go into a master's program. Currently, I'm at NAU in Flagstaff, and I'm working on my master's degree in rhetoric, writing, and digital media studies because I love the way people talk. I love the way that people write. It's just so unique to the person. And I also love digital media. I was like, oh, I love Instagram posts. Like, this is fantastic. So that's what I'm currently working on. That's what I'm studying right now, working on my master's degree, because I valued so much just being in London, taking photos. I've always loved photography, and I've just always loved engaging with people in like different like areas of community. So I'm excited for my program just because I know that the future is going to look different for me, something that aligns with how I felt when I was in London.
Well, let's jump into the discussion about queer identity, queer joy. You know, for a lot of queer students, the idea of studying abroad doesn't always feel obvious. And that's part of the reason why we want to do today's episode, is to show that our stories do indeed belong here. So for those students who are listening, if you're wondering about queer life in a specific USAC study abroad destination, or if you just want to talk through your concerns, just know that the USAC advising team is super open to those conversations. First of all, I'm curious to know, in what ways did studying abroad affect your sense of queer identity?
Well, I remember that summer, to spill a little bit of tea, I
Great.
was going through a breakup, had just like broken up the month before. And I just remember thinking like, what am I doing with my life? I have no idea. And I'm about to go abroad. Like, I can't be sad abroad. So I remember specifically thinking about like who I was as a person. And like, there's so many like layers to that, right? Like, I am a woman of color. I'm Mexican, Puerto Rican, and American, of course. And I am bisexual. So I kept thinking, well, it's June and it's Pride Month. I'm going to live it up and I'm going to have a great time. And I think that going into like London, entering that space, being in Shoreditch, especially, I just remember thinking like, oh, like everyone's just so kind and everyone's just flaunting their colors and who they like are, who they were. And I felt really at home in that sense because I was like, wow, like I don't feel the need to have to mask in any way or like hide like, oh, like who did you break up with? Or like what, like who are you looking for? What are you looking for? I'm like, I'm just here to like have a good time, connect with people, no matter what that looks like. And I'm felt very willing to just share all that part of me. I didn't hold back anything like, yeah, I'm bi, like I'm queer and I'm like having a great time in this space. So I really valued that part, that I didn't have to hide anything, and everyone where I was staying in my accommodation was also just the most lovely people ever. So I felt really at home.
Yeah, if there's one adjective that I think of when I hear the word London, it's inclusive. I remember telling students when they arrived, you know, you can be whoever you want to be in this city. Because it's such a multicultural city and because it's such a large urban center, that really gives you the freedom to be who you want to be.
At the time, I thought I had come out a long time ago, but it was only about 3 or 4 years ago. I'd come out in high school in 2016 as bi. And by the time I got to undergrad, I was still trying to explore my identity in many ways. And I went to school in a smaller school up in the mountains. Coming out of COVID in Texas and going into London, I thought, similar to what you had said, like this is an opportunity for me to try and rewrite myself. And I had never put myself out there before, just in terms of maybe going on dates, just meeting new people, connecting with people from all over the world. And for the first time, I did feel there was a lot of culture shock because I did feel like an American abroad. I was a little nervous at first. And I think that nervousness and that sort of apprehension, being surrounded by people from all over the world, really pushed me to embrace my queer identity more and that was the first time that I really felt comfortable trying to be out there and ask myself constantly, well, what does it mean to be out? How am I going to dress? How am I going to talk? How am I going to walk? And it it was great. It was a beautiful, chaotic mess, and it was just a journey of self-exploration and discovery. And I look back to those moments and think, who was that person? But that's really where I found my security. I feel more secure having been abroad in London with my queer identity. It was exciting. London was beautiful.
I mean, for you, Walker, I think about the person who arrived in September at the very beginning of the fall semester. And then I think about the person who left the UK, 9 months later in June. And from my perspective, these are two very different people. I think by the end of your time in the UK, you were really embracing your queer identity and you just became more comfortable with who you were. And that for me is always really exciting to see.
I would say that my queer identity, the way that I've viewed it, I think previously and especially before going to London was that I had all these identities figured out. I was like, yeah, I'm Mexican and I'm Puerto Rican and this. And I feel like that was really nicely sandwiched, and I added that up really nice. And then almost at the tail end, I'm like, oh, and being queer. Cause I've always kind of kept that either to myself or just as oh, yeah, that's definitely something a part of my life. And I don't think it was necessarily shame, but it was definitely something that I didn't know how to prioritize because my family, being Hispanic, like it wasn't for my family, I'm very thankful. It wasn't necessarily taboo, but it was definitely something oh, we don't really know. So it's an awkward, it's almost like an awkward hug. We support you. And what does that mean though? What does support even look like? And I think that summer I was able to explore a lot myself with all those identities, being an American abroad, right? And I know that Walker said that, and I was like, oh my gosh, definitely felt that. And then I was able to explore being queer, I think just a little bit more than I had previously ever. And I think in part of that was that perfect timing. It was June. And on top of that, I just had a lot of time to just walk around the city, see a lot of people, see a lot of the communities, and engage with them in a way that allowed me to just blossom and learn how to incorporate that really nicely into who I was. So that was just a missing key in my life. I felt after that, after getting a bunch of confidence from after London, I remember diving headfirst into being I'm going to be so intentional now from this point forward, of just making sure that all of me is represented equally as much as I can, and that they're all getting the care and love that they deserve. So that's something that I focused on. I remember my last year of my undergrad, and even now my master's program, one of my goals is to support queer students, and especially queer students of color, just because they're an underrepresented community in so many fields and so many different roles in just their life. So that's my goal. It's something that I hold near and dear to my heart.
So I wanted to say that Jeanine mentioned the word shame, and that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, actually, is because growing up in a small town in Texas, I never really learned much about the queer community. And so by the time that I recognized that I was starting to maybe feel a little different from my peers, but I didn't quite understand why, I was also very involved in the church. My family would want to go every Sunday if they could. And I'd say Thanksgiving or Christmas time or Easter, we would always say prayers. So religion was always a big connection with me. But there was this sort of a sense of shame because I didn't quite understand how to fit into my own within my identity. And it it wasn't until going to London that I thought, oh, well, I am completely separate and on my own now. And I am away from my parents. I have this part of my identity that I didn't really feel connected to. It felt like I was wearing a pair of shoes that were too big for my feet. And that was just an opportunity for me because it was just me. My family wasn't there. And I will have to say that my family has been supportive and I have been super grateful for that. But that lack of communication from the beginning was difficult initially. But being able to just be surrounded and make all those new friends and just see so many other people that were out and queer, I thought, okay, well, if they can be out and queer, then I can as well. And I learned how to define that for myself in London and just really blossomed into my own person after those 9 months abroad.
Yeah, those remarks really resonate with me. I'm originally from a small farming community in Wisconsin. There was not a queer community as I navigated through school. There was nobody in my immediate or my extended family who identified queer. So really one of the first experiences where I felt I could actually get a taste of that flavor was when I studied abroad. And, I love studying abroad so much that I turned it into a career. But again, I think that points to the really powerful potential of a study abroad experience to help us better understand who we are and who we want to be in the future. Okay, let's talk a little bit about queer joy. Is there a particular moment in London that comes to mind because you really felt like it made you feel like your true, authentic self?
Yes, I remember my best friend and I'm very fortunate enough that we were able to travel together for the USAC program. So I love that. My bestie, Alexis. And I remember her and I bought tickets to a Harry Styles concert at Wembley Stadium. And I remember both of us getting ready in our shared space in the kitchen for our accommodation. And then all the girls who shared our apartment space came out and they were helping us get ready. And I think that being in community with there is these two Australian girls that we made friends with, love them so much. We still talk to this day. And them helping me put on my makeup and telling me how beautiful I was. And it was just really reassuring. Oh, I feel really confident because I was nervous. Is my outfit is this appropriate for the two? And they were like, well, you are an American, so dress like an American. And I was like, you're so right. Yes, yes. So went with that. And I remember that moment in London because when we were on the tube, there was just so many people, obviously going to the same place as us. And when we're all together, we really connected in that way. So I think that part lives in my head the most because we were helping people take pictures. They were taking pictures of us. And just that part of us having this space, it just felt really nice. And everyone was just so nice to us and be like, where are you from? Are you so excited to be here? And I was like, of course I am. I'm so thankful. So I think of that moment a lot just because I felt just that being with people was it was really reassuring of who I was.
Absolutely. It's a moment of joy, of celebration, of positivity, of community. That's such a great story. Thanks for sharing.
So I connected a lot with my flatmates, and there was two of my flatmates in particular that I connected with in two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think, well, all of my flatmates in particular, but with my German flatmate, I really felt as if I had almost I had a brother abroad. And so I got to really connect with him. And I have never really fit in with feeling very masculine or feeling very feminine. I always thought it doesn't really matter. However I feel in the moment is however I feel. But with him, it was fun to sort of feel like a bro. We watched football. We had gone to a couple football matches. During Christmas time, we had actually went to the darts semifinals championship. So I got to do all of these things that I had never really connected with before in my undergrad previously, especially then during COVID. There just wasn't anybody that I could really talk with until then. And then I also had a Norwegian flatmate. And very opposite of that, we would go thrift shopping and maybe talk about the pretty guys that we had seen. And it was just very refreshing to feel very comfortable going in and out of these spaces. During Halloween, my German flatmate, I had told him before Halloween, you know what? If you get me a maid outfit, I'll wear it. And not only did he get it for me, but I was surprised that it actually fit me perfectly. So I was quite impressed for a couple of reasons. And just being surrounded by them, by all of my flatmates, which I have to also plug in to say that all of the Americans that I lived with that fall, all of us were queer, which I thought was quite funny. That the Europeans were straight, but the Americans, nope, they were not. But just being able to be so fluid with how I express myself and learn more about my identity by living with them was quite great. So some to Jeanine, a lot of that came down to clothes. Going thrift shopping in London, Shoreditch especially, there's just so much to explore.
I certainly remember a picture you showed me, Walker, of you in the maid outfit. That's something that
Yes.
I won't forget.
She did one of my flatmates did my makeup, and I looked quite glamorous. Full beard and beautiful glam face. Very androgynous.
I just love that you fully embraced your identity in that moment. That's a great story of queer joy, Walker. Kind of along this same question, were there any queer spaces or queer events that the two of you explored during your time in London?
There were. I wasn't there for Pride, unfortunately, but I believe that the university was a big setting as well, because I was able to, there were lots of people in my classes that were queer. And even if I might have been the only one, just being able to feel more secure in that was also important. I've not been used to seeing so many pride flags everywhere in the city. And there was a bookstore, actually. That was one of my favorite queer places. It's called Gaze the Word. It's been around since before the 1980s. And I definitely spent a lot of pounds there. And it was just so refreshing to enter that space, because of course I felt a little apprehensive at first. I had not put myself out there in a way where I just went to a fully queer bookstore. And I thought, well, I can't hide, because why else would I be in this bookstore? And it was great. I really enjoyed just being able to look at all of the books and say, oh, red, white, and royal blue. I'm in London. I think I should read this. And it was great. That was probably my favorite place. My favorite queer spot in London was Gaze the Word bookstore.
Walker, thank you so much for keeping that very PG. I know some of the stories that you told me went on the other end of the spectrum, so I applaud you for mentioning the bookstore rather than your nights out. All right, Jeanine, let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, I remember that month, since it's only a month, it was pretty jam-packed. So when we did have time just to kind of explore, we would try to shove as much as possible into that like one day. But I do remember when we were trying to figure out like, well, where do we want to go and what do we want to see? And I think as someone very similar to both of you, I grew up in a smallish town in California in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And we didn't have a space for anything like that. It would be like Pride Month, and then you would see like maybe one neighbor's flag like out, and then it would be gone like as soon as like the month was over. So being in London, that's only every like the second time in my life that I've been in a city, especially a city as huge as that one and living there so long. So I think for me, like being in like a queer space was definitely just like in the real inner city of London, going on the tube with people and seeing the decor and like the amount of pride that people had. And the city itself, just like, yeah, like we're here for our queer community. Everyone, whether you're visiting or if you're just like a permanent resident of the city and whatnot. I absolutely loved that. So I thought that was amazing and kind of like a shock to me because I was like, wow, like I've never seen so much rainbow in my life. And that was beautiful.
Yeah, the amazing thing about London is that you get it from so many different angles, right? So Walker, you referenced going to a gay bookstore. Jeanine, you mentioned different shops or cafes where you saw pride flags, but there's also gay sport teams. Of course, there's the pride event, but there's gay or queer-oriented music festivals. So I think, wherever you land on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, there's going to be something for you, which I think is one of the really nice perks about studying in a big city like London. All right, I want you to spill the tea, but just a little bit. Did you date any locals during your year in London?
I did actually. A lot of the people, as you had said before, were not originally from London, but I did go on a couple of dates. It didn't last more than a date, but it was a date.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to kind of dip your toes in the water. And Janine, what about you?
Yeah, I remember one date and that was like really nice. And I was like, well, this is like so much fun just exploring and finding places that like I didn't know about, but because they themselves were a local, they were like, I'll show you here. I'll show you here. Where do you want to go? And I was like, oh my gosh, everywhere. And I do remember having like gay panic a little bit I remember one time we were just like out for like evening dinner and I kept making eye contact with this girl and I was like, oh, it's so hard to know if someone's like into you or not. But I just remember like sitting there, like waiting for food, like just like sweating. I was like, do I make the move? I'm like, no, I can't. I was like, what if they're just looking over here? But that was like, I think that was like funny. I did end up speaking to her and that was really nice.
Oh, Janine, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So I thought a fun way to kind of wrap up the podcast is to do this quick fire where I just have some really short questions for you and you can kind of rapidly respond with some of the answers that initially come to your mind. All right. So the first one, favorite spot in London?
Camden Market.
The British Library.
If your time abroad were a drag king or queen name, what would it be?
Starfire.
I don't know. Probably like hot and ready. Like takeout.
Okay, let's do an era check. What era were you living in when you were studying abroad in London?
Reputation.
Discovery.
What's one thing every study abroad student should have?
A good pair of trainers.
A reusable water bottle. And bring it everywhere.
What's one thing you miss about London?
Community.
The people. Just the whole atmosphere.
And finally, finish this sentence. Thanks to my USAC study abroad experience, I am
A more confident and reliable person.
I am more secure. I'm more in touch with who I am.
And finally, finish the sentence. To our listeners, you should study abroad because...
You should study abroad because it's an experience that can change your life for the better.
That was perfect. I'm so happy with how that went. All right. Is there anything that the two of you want to add that maybe you didn't get a chance to? Anything on your mind that you want to share?
Yeah, I actually have, in my current role, I'm a graduate assistant at NAU. I work with campus living. So I work like in the dorms and I have students all the time who are like, they're just like talking to me in my office. They're in trouble or they're like concerned about something. And I have pictures of my time sitting abroad, like right behind me in my office. and they're like, oh my gosh, where did you go? Like, how was it? And they're like, oh, I can never do that. And I'm like, I immediately like put my hands on the table like all the time. And I'm like, yes, you 100% can. You could go here, you could go there. And those cities will always be there for you to explore, no matter like how old you are, how young you are, wherever you are in your life. Like it's always going to be there. And it's always going to be like a transformational experience.
Oh, I love hearing about that. We want to help you grow and flourish and have magical careers after you're done studying abroad with USAC. The two of you are the future, and you're going to be the people shaping the minds of the next generation and reminding them how impactful a study abroad experience can be. So again, the two of you are just superstars.
Thank you for listening to The Study Abroad Pod, a podcast brought to you by the University Studies Abroad Consortium. Please listen, subscribe, and review us on Buzzsprout or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow USAC on all your favorite social media channels via @StudyAbroadUSAC. And if you have an idea for a future episode or want to learn more about study abroad, you can email us at studyabroad@usac.edu.